Hey kids, howdy, and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. That's me. I'm here with Zoe. Hey, producer Zoe.
Hello.
We are coming at you for July 29th through August 1st. We're crossing over into a new month. The year is going by very, very fast. We're
And
already
Leo season, right?
in mid-season. Yeah, we are in Leo season. There's actually, it's a juicy week this week, later in the week. Like Sunday is kind of crazy. It's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about with Venus and Mercury's retrograde and the new moon at the end of the week. But first, a question as we do. Haley writes, "Hey, Michael, I hope to be a regular question asker going forward." Thank you. Absolutely. I love this question, Haley. So have at it. Thank you for being so kind to teach us each week. Oh, well, you're welcome. It ain't kindness. It's just I'm a teacher. It's like I can't help it. I just who I am. My whole family is teachers, by the way. Like everyone in my family is a teacher. Not everyone, obviously, but teaching is in the DNA. I know that you've spoken about the different house systems before, but I'm curious what house system you use specifically and why you've chosen to use it. I'm wavering between a couple different ones myself, and then she says, not whole sign. I say, yay. And I'd really love your perspective. Also, and what do you do for those who were born at a higher latitude? Thanks a load, Haley. And yes, that's actually going to be a thing. She is obviously doing her research because she knows that the problem with Placidus, which is the house system I use, is high latitudes or low latitudes, but we don't have human beings who live at low latitudes, who are born in low latitudes. So this actually sent me into doing a little bit of digging. So I just Googled house systems, and there are like a dozen. Here they are in alphabetical order. There's Alcabitius, Campanus, Equal, which I've heard of, Coke, which I've not heard of, Meridian, Morinus, Placidus, which I've heard of and I use, Porphyry, with PHs. This is my favorite, Regiomontanus. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Topocentric, Velo, VEHLOW, and whole sign. Equal and whole sign are similar, but not the same thing. So there are obviously lots of disciplines, and this, of course, makes sense. Astrology is many thousands of years old, and any number of cultures have created structures through which to understand astrology. So these house systems, which most of which I've never heard of, are obviously coming from history and culture in different places. Some of what I'm going to say is a little bit beyond my pay grade, like this. Whole sign is about the space that it takes to move through a sign, the space being 30 degrees. Every sign is 30 degrees wide, and whole sign uses just that idea of 30 degrees. Placidus takes in account time. Time is then a focus. So in the space arena, whole sign, you don't need to worry about the distinctions that come with time. You just say, here's the start, and everything is 30 degrees wide. Makes it very simple. But Placidus is technically the most accurate when it comes to things like understanding latitude and longitude on the planet from a more scientific perspective. Actually, I will say something about equal house, because this is a simplified house structure where every house has 30 degrees, but it starts at the degree point of the rising sign. So in equal house, if I have 22 degrees Sagittarius rising, then my second house would be 22 degrees of Capricorn. And then the third house would be 22 degrees of Aquarius, and so on. I assume that that's a way of simplifying what you're looking at so that it's more accessible to the newbie. Whereas whole sign, which is a similar kind of, I got to be really careful here because I don't want to insult anybody. Because I was going to say dumbing down. I don't want to say that because there is power and purpose to whole sign. It's just it's old and therefore it doesn't interest me. So let me speak into what that is or why that is. So whole sign is when each house is just simply the sign. So whatever your rising sign would be, that becomes your first house, and the whole sign is considered the first house. And then the whole sign of the second sign would be your second house, and on and on and on. So you would still have a thing called an ascendant, but that ascendant might be a point inside your first house or inside your 12th house. Because the house structure on the flat map of the paper that it's on is just saying it's sign by sign by sign, house by house by house, and then everything falls into that. Now, Placidus' system is much more modern. It takes time into consideration in such a way that when you that's where it's beyond my pay grade. I can't really describe to you what it means that one uses space only and one incorporates time. I feel like I understand what that means intuitively, but man, I can't explain it like a teacher because I just don't know that math. It's just I'm not sophisticated or smart enough in that area to describe it. But how it happens is when you take your first breath, mathematically, that establishes the eastern horizon and the noon point, the straight up and down point that create the angles of the chart. So the rising sign has an opposite. It's the descendant. The top part of the chart that I'm calling the noon or the up is the midheaven, which is the public experience in the chart. And then the bottom is the imam kolai, the home and hearth point. So now you've got the 4 points that establish the cross of the chart. And then there's an equation that trisects those quarters. So the time of birth creates the 4 quarters, and then math, whatever the math is, trisects each of those quarters, dividing them into 3 parts. 4 quarters divided into 3 parts, 12 houses. What makes a difference then in Placidus is latitude and longitude counts. That the further north you go, the wider some of those houses are going to be because the Earth is narrower. So this is what she was talking about when she said, what do you do for people born in northern latitudes? When I read somebody who's born in Norway or Alaska, some of their houses are like 50 degrees wide because of this math. And yeah, it does become sort of weird because such a person might have a planet transiting one wide house for weeks and weeks and weeks and then zips through another house because it's smaller because they're from a northern latitude. And frankly, I can't answer to that because I've only read a handful of people who were born so far north that this was the case in their charts. So back to whole sign and Hellenistic astrology. So here's the real objection I have with whole sign. Hellenistic astrology comes from the Hellenistic era, like 300 BC. That's an ancient structure for a world that didn't know the kind of science that we know now, that didn't have the unconscious, discovered and elaborated on, right? There's so much advancement since the 3rd century BC that an astrology that was popular that long ago does not interest me. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Now, Hellenistic astrology is getting a resurgence. It's beyond me. I don't know why that is. It's not interesting to me. It's obviously interesting to a lot of people. So that's why I want to be really careful where I sort of decry it. I want to be respectful for those who respond to it. And maybe I'm guessing they have a sense of, well, this is more traditional and foundational. Therefore, it's valuable as that. But I don't find that interesting. I'm not interested. I know there's a teacher out there whose name I won't mention, who teaches Hellenistic astrology, and I roll my eyes a lot when she does this, and she was out there teaching a class in what's called Hellenistic voids, the void of the moon, which I talk about every time it's void in my Red Robe Astrology videos and my daily Astro Alert emails, because it's important to know how to work with a void. Every 2.5 days, there's this quiet, sort of restful energy from the moon. You want to respond to that and also be behind the scenes and then shoot out when the moon changes signs. That's the use of a void. Hellenistic voids can't work with planets that weren't discovered back then. Why would you
Right.
work with a void moon that's ignoring a whole bunch of planets that those many centuries ago they didn't know about? See, so that's why I have this objection to Hellenistic astrology in general, is because why would you do something that's based on something so old when we've advanced so much? And Placidus' house system has an exactitude that this astrologer loves. I like the precision of transits because that's how I feel them. And a natal chart using Placidus is going to be more technically accurate to the latitudes and longitudes of being born on Earth. So that's why I use it. That's why I love it. And I'm repeating myself now, so I'll just end with I don't understand why Hellenistic is making a comeback. If it is and you like that, have at it. You're probably not listening to me. So have at it, and you won't hear much about that from me because I like Placidus.
But what do those people have to say about the planets that are not considered in Hellenistic astrology?
I've never had the conversation, so I
Got it.
don't know.
Okay.
And it would be a fascinating conversation to have.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Listen, one day maybe I'll have somebody on my podcast as a guest and sort of, do that. I reach out to this woman that I sometimes follow. Not sometimes, I follow her. I like her astrology knowledge. I just don't understand why she's focusing on Hellenistic. And so who knows? Maybe we'll reach out and have a little powwow in a couple of months. So it's a quiet week for the most part until we get to the weekend. But I just, when it's quiet like this and I'm looking around, there are things that might be happening in a week that typically I wouldn't talk about because there's too much else to talk about. So I'll just point out that Wednesday and Thursday of this week are just really productive, fast-moving energy that inspires sort of easy connection with others and a kind of ability to move projects and goals further, especially ones that require cooperation with others. On Wednesday, the sun's going to trine the north node of the moon. That's a kind of conscious awareness placed on who you're connecting with and why. It means that as you gather in the middle of the week, you'll gather with ease and grace and flow and purpose and power. And then the very next day, on Thursday, Mars steps into touching the north node of the moon in a sextile. That's the productivity piece. That's a transit that says if you've got things you want to accomplish and push into the next sort of iteration of its expression, the middle of this week is perfect for that. And because the nodes of the moon, when they're transited, are so often reflecting collective experiences, gatherings with others, having group associations rise up, that kind of out and about sensation is often what's up when the nodes are transited. And since Monday through Friday is quiet in terms of like big juicy bumps or delays or transformations, there are none of that. It does make these two productive flowing days of Wednesday and Thursday very productive, good for planning things like, your meetings, you're looking at the dates for ahead. I'm certainly gonna spend some of that time. It's like I've just talked to Lisa, my assistant, last week about it's now time to get the schedule set for 2025. That's going to be a next week project.
Wow.
This just means like, talking about the class. It's a horrible part of my business. It's like, okay, when are we going to teach what? And can we do it in November? What does March look
Yeah.
like? And, I have Lisa go to the calendar and put all the full moons into the calendar so I can take them off because I don't work on the full moons. But I thought it was interesting that that's planned for next week. And Lisa and I already talked about it. So That kind of thing for Wednesday and Thursday, productive, forward movement kind of stuff. It's a very big week for Venus. And here we go with our last and final Venus report. Now maybe you'll know why I'm making such a big deal about Venus all year, because Venus returns to where she started last summer's retrograde on Sunday in the Leo new moon. So Venus is going to be at the return place on Sunday, 28 degrees of Leo, while we have this 11-degree Leo or 12-degree Leo new moon. So to me, that's like I've been doing this all year for this week's podcast to say our heart centers are going to be back in the place we started a long journey at, that started with a retrograde, that said, let's look below the hood and see how our engines are doing in the giving and receiving of love arena. And then because that retrograde was so powerful and it involved Pluto in some ways, I've been talking about her movement all year because she's been going around the ecliptic from Leo last summer into Leo this summer. And the fact that she gets to the exact place she was at the exact moment of the new moon lights this astrologer up. I like the precision of this. It makes it have more gravitas and meaning for me that we now get to set intentions from a place of a loving heart that's transformed completely in the last year. So as we move through this week, there's some interesting sort of Venus storylines, and it starts with a trine from Venus to Chiron on Tuesday. So tomorrow we're moving into like a little flurry of feeling open in the heart because we've healed some wounds. Then on Friday, there's a square from Venus to Uranus. That's going to bring up a shakeup or two. Of Uranus tends to, bring the sudden and the unexpected. And Venus being in a square with Uranus means there's the possibility of sudden relational shifts as the weekend arrives. And then we set intentions on Sunday in a way that includes an open, loving heart, filled with a willingness to love out loud in the manner that Leo sort of invented. And then during the new moon itself, which I may mention again at the end of the podcast when I'm talking about that new moon, Venus is going to hit Neptune in the great eliminator angle. I love that for a year of Venus process because the 150-degree angle always means we're letting something go. And when it's with Neptune, we're letting something go that we might not have known or seen or been privy to. Neptune reveals things in like the fog lifting. It's like, oh, I didn't see that before. Oh, he's just not into me. I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
So I love that in the new moon, we're also then getting to move in a new direction based on emotional clarity after a lot of emotional confusion. And then hours after the new moon, Venus changes signs, moves into Virgo, and we move through 3.5 weeks of like healing in the heart and putting things together in that organized way that Venus and Virgo will bring to us. And you can be assured that at the top of next week's podcast, I will be reminding you all of this because it is a Sunday to Monday experience that I'm talking about. So this weekend, Sunday to Monday, one of the things that's interesting is Venus returns as part of the new moon, allowing us to let go of something we had been confused about. And then Venus changes signs, and we're just in brand new territory in matters of the heart. So Sunday is juicy, 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 kids, because not only is it a new moon, it's the day that Mercury turns around and goes retrograde. So Venus returns, Mercury turns around. So the new moon hits in the wee hours of Sunday as sort of Saturday's becoming Sunday, and then it's Sunday night Pacific time, around 9 p.m., that Mercury will turn around. Now, for one thing, that means that Sunday is going to be a cranky day for some. I know
Okay.
that I always feel some kind of way the day that Mercury is turning around, and I call it cranky. It's just that kind of like, "Arr." But I've noticed over 30 years that it's very consistent. The day that Mercury turns around, I feel cranky. So that's not uncommon. I've heard from other people as well. So I'll remind you guys of the shadow period. It started on July 17th. So if you're hearing about this for the first time and you have a journal or a calendar you can look at, if you glance back to July 17th through Sunday, August 4th, any communication challenge or gaffe or problem or a negotiation that needs more passes to get through, anything like that, anything neck up, and I'll add, that was problematic because the things that went well don't really need your attention. The things that are challenging will come up again as a challenge, so they do need your attention. So anything from the neck up that was challenging from July 17th to August 4th will come up again thematically in the backward portion. That backward portion starts Sunday night, the 4th, and he turns around and goes direct again on August 28th. So we spend the bulk of August with Mercury turned around. Then we'll talk about this during it, of course, but we will also talk about the direct shadow, the wrap up piece that starts at the end of August on the 28th through September 11th. The essence of this retrograde is sort of twofold. One, I'd like to always describe any Mercury retrograde that crosses over in between two signs is helping us amplify something about the sign that it backtracks into. So if Mercury moves into Virgo, where we're in his ruling sign, we're in communication mastery, we're in an ability to be really fabulously precise and profound with our words and our mind. But we can get a little stuck in the details. And Mercury's going to say, no, we need a little more creativity and bravura and Leonian leadership in our voices. Let's go back into Leo and marinate in the waters of sun-centered fabulousness. And then we'll return to Virgo and put it all together in that integrated sort of way. So I guess I'm speaking to those of you who are looking to have more oomph in your voice, a little more Leonian fire in your voice. This retrograde is for you. And it's also a healing Mercury retrograde. Not only is Virgo a sign ruled by Mercury, so it's about the precision of communication, Virgo is also ruled by Chiron, the great healer. That's his ruling sign. So Mercury's retrograding in the sign of Virgo brings about a healing potential, and Mercury will trine Chiron 3 times during this retrograde.
That's lovely.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And because, Chiron is in the fire sign of Aries, Mercury's going to trine Chiron 3 times from Leo, not Virgo. I like that because Mercury in Virgo is already in the healing land. It's when we get out into extroverted use of the voice, Mercury in Leo, that's where we need to have the healing present, right? So that we can strip out challenges in the voice that come from wound. I'm thinking just of my own sort of self and, being, somebody with, a little narcissism, a little I'm Leo Sun, Leo Venus, right? I always want to be the center of everything. So I've cultivated a life where I get to be front and center a lot. But I certainly understand the wounds of a voice that is too full of self and not integrated enough into being a voice of healing. And so that might be a sort of way that the Leo Virgo passage works and this trine from Mercury to Chiron. Now, Mercury's also going to square Uranus 3 times. That means we're going to be knocked on our ass. Uranus is the higher octave of the mind. Mercury and Uranus relate. All of the personal planets have an upper planet, outer planet sort of cousin. And in the mind, it's Mercury and Uranus. So 3 squares for Mercury to Uranus is going to knock you on your ass. A sesqui square 3 times to the north node, that's just friction around gatherings, cooperating, working with others. And then an inconjunct to Neptune is similar to what Venus is doing with Neptune. An inconjunct is an exit moment or the moving in a new direction, like a fork in the road. And when Neptune is touched in that geometry, the fork in the road comes when the fog lifts. And we're like, I didn't see that before. And so Venus is doing that at some point, and so is Mercury. So a Mercury retrograde that has an inconjunct to Neptune in it is also going to reveal things that you might be in denial of before the retrograde starts, that at the end of the retrograde, you'll be like, oh, fuck. I'm glad I finally saw that for what it really is. I will review this in the top of the next week's podcast because it will have just turned around the night that next week's podcast comes out. Like literally, Mercury will turn around at 9, and 3 hours later, next week's podcast will come out. And God help us with the delivery of that podcast with Mercury turning around that night, because that sometimes happens in a funny sort of way. But anyway, I will talk about this again at the top of next week's podcast because it will have just happened. And of course, I will keep you posted into every moment one of those triple transits comes up. You will hear about it from me both here on the podcast, in my daily Astro Alert subscription series, if you are a subscriber, and my Red Robe Astrology videos that you find everywhere on social media. Leo new moon, Sunday, wee hours of the morning Pacific time. At 4:14 a.m. Pacific, the sun and the moon will gather at 12 degrees of Leo, and we are off to the races in a lunar cycle driven by sun-centered rulership of who we are in our most creative spaces and how we shine our creative impulses into the world. In Leo, we're interested in what lights us up. Leo is the sign ruled by the sun, and the sun is the center of the solar system, shining its light brightly, doing nothing but burning. Like the sun knows nothing but I am, I burn, I shine, I am bright, I am warm, I am. And so Leo as an archetype is the part of us that understands that we are at the center of our experience, that all we are to do is shine brightly. So it's the one sign of the 12 where there is nothing but the expression that's likened to the sun's rays. Leo's expression is joy, play, creative expression, putting yourself at the center of anything. So there's where Leo connects to leadership and, being front and center in a very literal way. I have a Leo sun, and my Leo sun is anoretic, 30th degree, 29 degrees, 57 minutes of Leo. And I remember a friend of mine watched me do a show on stage once. He's like, Michael, you really can make other people invisible. It's like it's not even something I try to do. It's like I gravitate to the center of every group photo I'm in. And it's not like I'm ever thinking, I want to be in the center. It's just where I wind up. I promise you, if there was like, let's do a group photo and I just stood somewhere, everybody would gather around me and I would still be in the center. I would do that as an experiment, even if I had to eat crow when it was over, and it didn't happen that way.
Huh.
Leo gravitates to the center. So forget about me now. I'm done with my Leo narcissistic expression about self. Look at me. And understand that quality is in all of us. We all have a part of us that understands what it is to be front and center, to value your own creative expression, and have an ability to shine brightly. Now, not everybody lives there. And we sort of struggle with that if that's not your story. And Leo season is where we get to tap into that as it lives in all of us, no matter how big or small. So a Leo new moon is one in which you want to examine your life, your creative expressions, your readiness to be front and center, and intend that. You know, a Leonian front and center can be about watercoloring in the closet with the lights out and still be creative and doesn't have to be about an extroverted need to like share it with the world.
It's just more of, like, putting yourself out into the world, whatever that means.
Yes, whatever that means for you. In other words, I, as an extroverted performer type, where my Leo sun, matches my Leonian personality, then it becomes very overt when you look at someone like me.
Mhm.
But Zoe, you're very different than I am. Much more extroverted, much more sort of mysterious, and like, ooh, what's going on over there? And yet, your life is filled with Leonian expression of creativity, of music, of performance. Even when you're helping students perform music in the Chinese instruments that you work with, all of that's your Leo.
Mm.
It may not be bright as mine in a overt way, but it's your version of I am the sun at the center of my expression.
Yeah.
And so everybody wants to find that. And if you know your chart, of course, you look to the house in your natal chart that's ruled by Leo. And that's an area of consciousness for you individually that might be well suited to set intentions focused on whatever house that happens to be. As lunations go, this one has less difficult, challenging geometry than most of the new and full moons we've had this year. So there's, in some ways, a little bit more ease than in some new moons that we've had. So I'll talk about some of the affirmative, easy energies. There's a beautiful trine from the new moon, the sun and the moon, to the north node of the moon. So any new moon where we're setting intentions about where we want to go in the future and having that new moon harmoniously touching the point that represents the future that we're all moving towards, the north node, makes this whole lunar cycle have some measure of grace with the things we want to put out into the world, reaching the world during this lunar cycle because of this proximity, not proximity, but the harmonious geometry of a trine between the new moon and the north node. Mars and Jupiter are hanging out together in Gemini right now. Mars is at 9 degrees of Gemini. Jupiter's at 15 degrees of Gemini. Ironically, if you do like the midpoint between 9 and 15, you basically get 12. What that means is the 12-degree Leo new moon is perfectly harmonizing the planet of action and the planet of abundance and expansion, who are working really well together in a sign that allows us to share ideas and connect with others easily, Gemini. This is an incredibly powerful and productive energy for manifestation. New moons say, I want, and I'm going to set the intention to get. Leo says it can be big and it can be centered on me. That it's in a 60-degree angle with two planets that literally help us create magnificent abundance, prosperity in the form of goals and ambitions that we have. That makes this new moon sort of off the chains for creating new stuff. The pop astrologers will have a blast with this, telling you, everybody's going to win the lottery this, lunar cycle.
Yeah.
That's unlikely. But if you are in good alignment with what's yours to create, and you're not, you're right-sized with all of that, and you set powerful intentions that come from your creative desires, the energy to tap into Mars's capacity to help us make things and Jupiter's capacity to help us make things fabulous, big, and expansive, it's in there. Now, there's all sorts of complexity in the personal planets in and right after the new moon. And that adds a kind of golly, and I don't even know what to say. It adds a complexity. Let me talk about what it is before trying to come up with the adjective. It's the idea that Venus at the final degree of Leo, she hits the 28-degree point before the new moon, but at the new moon and beyond it, she's at the 30th degree of Leo. So that's Venus, love, emotional body in the expansive, gregarious sign of Leo, facing down Neptune, the planet of spirit and the arbiter of the unconscious mind, holding the great eliminator angle. Just as we set intentions, then Venus takes this energy of seeing things more clearly or getting below something that had been confusing or, the veil lifting some, because that's the essence of this transit. Then Venus pops right into Virgo, allowing for whatever is discovered in this moment to be healed. And then within an hour or so of that, the planet that governs our thoughts and our perceptions turns around and goes retrograde. So that's the complexity I mean. So that if I'm using language to describe the energy I'm reading when I look at this chart, and I say it's positive and productive and expansive, and you just have to tap in, I then also have to say you might be emotionally confused. You might be mentally confused. You might be cranky. You might be in a change that's in a relational dynamic that isn't clear as we move through the weekend into next week, Monday, Sunday, Tuesday, right? So that's what I mean by complexity. I have to say powerful, creative new moon, have at it. And if you're going through anything dicey that includes thought forms or emotional patterns, they're being worked on in an intricate kind of way as we move through this weekend into next week. Then we will meet back here again with next week's podcast episode. We'll talk a little bit about this new moon and Mercury's retrograde and Venus's changing signs from the other side. Meanwhile, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email and dream. It is a lot of very random things coming in and out.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Yeah, Madison says, hello. I don't remember the entire dream, but the portion I do remember is so vivid, and it seems like there's a lot of contradiction. Here was my dream. I walked out of my back patio door into my backyard and noticed that our cement patio was crumbling in several spots. One spot I could see murky, shallow swamp water beneath where it was cracked. In another area, I could see a previous existing concrete pad beneath it. I was disappointed because it was smaller, but I knew we couldn't afford to replace the existing patio. I went and sat down in my yard and noticed that the garden was flourishing. Mostly with tropical and citrus fruits like mangoes, papaya, grapefruit, and oranges. It was everywhere and thriving, in every garden bed and every tree. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woolly mammoth walking through the street behind my backyard.
And
That's it. That's like all
that's
she
it.
wrote.
Oh my God.
Is this
Oh.
too
Now
discombobulated?
listen, what I love about this, Zoe, is you picked it because you pick all the dreams. And
Right.
so that counts for me
Okay.
because you're the ear of the audience. Like, that's
So
why you're
maybe they're
here,
interested.
Zoe.
Yeah.
Like that structurally. Like, forgive me for breaking the fourth wall like this, kids, but like that's why Zoe's here. Zoe is here so that there's a voice in the pod that represents the person who's listening to Astrology, Knowledge, and Dreams. So you as producer and the voice of the audience, like what you choose counts for me. So if I looked at this, I might go, well, there's no real storyline. It's a little rambling. I don't know. And you look at this and go, wow, that interests me.
It
And
does.
that interests me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
There you go. All right. So in a case like this, because the storyline doesn't seem overtly clear, we will sort of inch through. But there is a storyline about foundations and the current foundation changing. But then we go someplace that is like, not really sure why we go where we go, but let's inch into it.
Mm.
So, back patio door into the yard is where we start. So, if we're in the backyard, then we know that we're in Madison's consciousness of that which is private.
Okay.
Only people at the barbecue are in the backyard and the people who live in the house. So it's a space that's external to the home, which means it's not about the self directly. It is about aspects of self that Madison shares, but it's intimate space. It's hidden space. So it's not a knowable space. It's just like by invitation only. Maybe I'll add this distinction. The front yard is what we manicure to show the world who we want them to think we are.
Right.
The backyard is a more authentic expression of who we are outside of ourselves. So the patio becomes a consciousness itself. It's not really the house, but it's not the yard. It's the bridge between the self of the house and the other space that is outside of self, right? So it's an interesting focus of the scene. So you remember how I said the house is the self and the yard is outside of the self, what we share with others. Then the patio would kind of be like how we invite people into our intimate space if they share the patio, and it's how we as the symbolic house inch out into public space and say, here, I'm safe and comfortable with this much intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crumbling. So if it's crumbling, it means it's old. It means it needs repair. So foundation or boundaries or what's below, feeling solid. Something about feeling solid is giving way because change is happening. So it's a dream about change. It might not be change that's obvious and overt because it's behind the scenes. It's outside of the house, so it's not change that's happening inside of Madison, but it might be reflecting changes that are about how Madison shares her life with certain people in an intimate way. Even if it's about what she'd be willing to share, it doesn't have to connect with the actual experience of sharing with others. Like there's nobody in the dream. It's like it's not a dream about a patio barbecue. She's just there. So it's about her consideration of what she'll share with others intimately while still maintaining a sense of trueness to self. The patio is attached to the house. We see two things under the surface. So we have two messages about this foundational crumble that needs attention. One is that below this foundation is some messy emotions, murky, shallow swamp water. Swamp water is water that's mixed with land. Swamps are both land and water both. And so water being part of our emotional makeup symbolically, I would say that the crumbling foundation is revealing some conflicted emotions on one hand and an old way of standing that isn't right anymore. I can't afford the new one, which means I'm not ready for the big change, but I know I don't want to go back to the old one. It's too small. So even there could be a little bit like a literal interpretation. If the patio is about intimate aspects of Madison that can be shared with others when they deserve to be in the privacy of the backyard, the old, smaller patio is outdated. The new patio needs work, but we can't afford a new one yet. Now, this is interesting. This reminds me of standard conflicts that show up when people want to expand and can't really afford it yet. I mean, I'm just thinking about conversations I've had with my sister a million times about, conversations she's had with her husband about the house and retirement and how they're going to work things. It's like the old is no longer present. The new one needs work, but we can't quite do it. That's like a conversation about things that need to be fixed that maybe we're not ready to fix. Now, I'm pointing that out. I'm making a big deal about that section of the dream being like a complaint section.
Mm-hmm.
Because then what does she do? She sits down in her garden. Now, Madison is taking stock of what is. No longer complaining about what needs work. She's just noticing. And what does she notice? It's flourishing. Not only is it flourishing, it's flourishing in a kind of warm, sticky manner that breeds beautiful nutrition that is yummy, delicious, and sustaining. Mangoes, papayas, grapefruit, oranges. Wow, yum, yum, yum. Every bud is blooming. But she doesn't dig to find that. She doesn't go somewhere else to find that. She doesn't hire the construction people to make the new patio to see that. She moves away from the complaint and sits down and notices, holy shit, everything's hugely abundant. To me, the woolly mammoth represents the cycles of abundance that are infinite. Once woolly mammoths roamed the earth in abundance. They no longer do, but there are other things of abundant nature that have taken over and are abundant now. I mean, granted, we could get into a conversation about the most abundant thing on the planet now is steel and concrete and not like yummy bleeding, animals with heartbeats. But we're not talking about real life. We're talking about symbolic life through dreams. And to me, the woolly mammoth that comes next after we're considering all of this yummy garden is like Madison's soul reminding her that abundance changes. What we focus on shifts. What might have been an abundance from the past is beautiful, but it's not the abundance of now or tomorrow. But no matter how you slice it, to me, the dream's linchpin is going away from the problematic patio into the noticing of a magnificent, abundant experience that's right there, right now for her to enjoy.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.